Hello, welcome everybody to Monster Monday. My name is DM Galabond, and tonight we are going to be talking about the Boneclaw. But something I would feel remiss not mentioning tonight, since it is November 11th, which in the U.S. at least is Veterans Day. I just want to thank everybody who has served our country in uniform, been in the armed services, or is currently serving. We really appreciate the things that you do. I know that sometimes you, in the past, people who have served have had to go into very difficult places under very difficult personal and political circumstances. Um, and we always should try to remember that it's not the men and women that wear the uniform that are making the decisions. It's the people in the suits in Washington that make the decisions. So if you don't like those decisions, vote them out. But for all of those of you who are serving or have served, my deepest heartfelt thanks for your service. And now we're going to move along and talk about the order of the day, Monster Monday, the Boneclaw. Well, what exactly is a Boneclaw? Well, in 5th edition, that's what a Boneclaw looks like. But a little bit about the show itself. I am DM Galabond, as I said before. I have a few other shows on this here Twitch channel. Saturdays at noon, I host an original D&D game called The History of D&D. Right now, everyone is first level, and the party is in the middle of trying to explore a facility that they may get to call their own home base if they please the village council. On Sundays, I host a game called The Walker of Waterdeep, Sundays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. This is a show where we cross the streams between 5th edition D&D and Magic the Gathering. And right now, the party is dealing with the aftermath of a Githyanki attack on Waterdeep, and they are dealing with a visiting delegation from Ravnica. And those Ravnicans really want them to go to Ravnica, and the party really wants to find out more about those silly Githyanki and why they attacked their city. On Tuesday nights on this here Twitch channel, I do Tales from the Table, where I do a short recap of both the History of D&D session and the Walker of Waterdeep session from the weekend. Again, all of that is right here on this Twitch channel at Twitch TV Galabond. And tonight I'm announcing something new. I have a Patreon. Patreon is now live. It is at www.patreon.com/DMGalabond. So you can go over there and you can find out more about the stuff that I do. And if you like this show or if you like other shows, there are ways that you can support what I do and even convince me by your support to do more stuff. You can find out all about that over at the Patreon. And as with every week, I try to give credit for the images that I use, and this one is right out of the D&D Beyond website and their version of the monsters that have been published for D&D. This is what the 5th edition Boneclaw looks like. So let's talk a little bit about the Boneclaw. What exactly is he? Well, he's a large undead. He's 8 feet tall, and he weighs about 300 pounds. Now, you notice that he has these really long arms and super long fingers and nails. And with those arms, it can reach enemies up to 15 feet away. And this is part of really what its shtick is all about. Now, another thing that this character has, and kind of one of the reasons I like it, we said it's a very large undead, but despite its size, it can use the hide action as a bonus action if it is in dim light or shadow. So this thing can literally just sneak right up next to the party without them noticing it, or even sneak 15 feet away from the party before it pounces with those huge arms. Now, when it decides to attack, the Boneclaw makes 2 claw attacks, and if it grapples an opponent, it can then choose to teleport up to 60 feet away into another area of dim light or shadow, carrying a grappled victim with it. So it's like, hey, where'd Bob go? And then suddenly you hear Bob's screams from way over there in those shadows over there. Yeah, so that can happen with this guy. Now let's talk a little bit about the lore of the Boneclaw. Now, in 5th edition, I was researching the lore, and we're going to talk about 5th edition now, and we'll go back to earlier editions later. But in 5th edition, the Boneclaw is created when a wizard tries to become a lich and fails, and it's a specific type of failure. If the caster is not strong enough to force its own soul into a phylactery, the soul will then seek out a new master to serve. Well, what kind of master will it serve? This master is always a humanoid with a hate-filled heart, often a bully, a petty criminal, and this is straight out of the book, folks, even an extremely hateful child. Now, you kind of wonder, well, what would such a master do with one of these things? Well, the Boneclaw becomes enslaved, and it acts upon the master's wishes and subconscious whims. And because of that, the master is often even unaware that the Boneclaw exists, and it's unaware that it has this entity that is attached to it. And the things will start happening, like many unexplained murders and disappearances, often extremely gory murders, as you might imagine by the way this thing is put together. And the only link between the victims is the master's envy or hunger for revenge against the people that get killed. So this is kind of foreshadowing one of the ways that I think this would be a really cool way to use this monster in a campaign. Now, we said that this is an undead creature, so undead creature type, and this is a cool undead picture I found from Pixabay. To be quite honest, I was thinking of trying to find a Pixabay version of the old Grateful Dead skeletons when they were dancing and everything like that, but I couldn't quite find one there. This was the closest I could come. So now, what are the properties of undead in 5th edition? They have dark vision. They're immune to many attacks, so mind-altering spells, poison, sleep, paralysis, stunning, disease, and death effects have no, they're immune to all that stuff. And undead do not breathe, eat, or sleep. So that's just a general undead. Now, of course, the Boneclaw itself has some different properties, which we will talk about a little bit later when we get to the mechanical effects of the creature. Now, terrain. So where would you find a Boneclaw in the wild? Well, you've probably guessed from what we said before. There is no such thing as finding one of these in the wild, because it's always the result of a wizard attempting to become a lich. It's always man-made, and you always find this in an urban environment. Well, almost always find it in an urban environment. I suppose it could be suburban or a village or something like that, but probably more likely and more effective when you're putting this in a campaign to set it in an urban environment. Um, and let's talk about some of the flavor features of the Boneclaw. So flavor features, that's my term for the non-mechanical features. The languages it has. It speaks common and the native language of its master. Now that's whatever its current master is. Um, it delights in murder and causing horrific pain, as you might imagine from the way the monster looks. It lurks like a spider in the shadows. So it just kind of is a stalker of sorts and can wait there patiently to do the bidding or the will of its master. And as we said before, they often serve masters who don't even know the Boneclaw exists. But the monster manifests that master's intense hatred, envy, or thirst for revenge against people that are around them. So um, that makes it an extremely potent and extremely chaotic and extremely unpredictable enemy in terms of when and where it will strike, depending on sort of what the whims of the master are. Well, now let's get a little bit into the mechanics of the Boneclaw. Um, what makes the Boneclaw tick? Um, Well, in 5th edition, it's a CR12 monster. It has a 16 armor class, which is just a natural armor class, 127 hit points, and it's got 40 feet of movement. Now we already said it teleports 60 feet, but it can move 40 feet and then use its teleport as part of its attack action. So, in addition to the regular undead template, the Boneclaw is also resistant to cold, necrotic, and non-magical weapon damage. So that means you hit it, it's only going to take half the damage instead of the full amount. It has shadow stealth. So while in dim light or darkness, it can use the hide action as a bonus action. And then rejuvenation. This is one of the scariest things about this. It gains a new body in 1d10 hours after it's destroyed, as long as its master lives. So somebody could see this monster, see it going around killing people, hire adventurers to go out and destroy it, and think they've got it destroyed. And then the next time that master gets mad at somebody, it's right back again. And it can be going around doing that. So there's a key here: as long as its master lives. That's also, there's another little key element of it that I probably should have put in the flavor, that it is only able to serve evil. So if the master that this thing is tied to, if they ever find redemption for themselves, then that destroys the Boneclaw. So, it's probably, if you take the sense of justice that a lot of D&D civilizations have, um, probably the way you're going to get rid of the Boneclaw is you're going to kill the master that it's tied to once you figure that out. There may be some really enlightened cultures and some really, um, well, some really sappy NPCs that might have one of these things tied to them that may go through having an incredible epiphany and being able to destroy the Boneclaw that way. But yeah, that would be a real stretch for someone who has gone through, um, who has been evil enough to attract this thing in the first place. So now let's talk a little bit about the attacks and special abilities. And this gets really interesting with the Boneclaw. First of all, I was looking for something to epitomize its special damage, and this was the closest thing I could find, a rotting orange. So let's see if you can guess what some of its special abilities are. So first of all, it has multi-attacks. 2 claw attacks. It can reach up to 15 feet away and pull a grappled creature 10 feet towards itself. So if it hits with both claws, it's got you grappled, and then it just pulls you in like for a big bear hug. Now, once it has an enemy grappled, um, if it's in darkness or dim light, it can then cause 5d12 plus 2 necrotic damage to any number of creatures it chooses as long as they are within 5 feet of it. Then it teleports up to 60 feet away with its grappled opponent in its claws and goes to work on it. So you could imagine this thing just kind of waiting in the shadows till the whole party goes by. It reaches out, it grabs poor Bob and pulls Bob in for a bear hug. And then it waits until the whole party surrounds it and starts to try to hit it. Then it hits everybody else with this 5d12 plus 2 necrotic damage, and then takes Bob 60 feet away into the shadows and starts doing horrible things to poor Bob. So that's like a yeah, you said it right, Luis. That sounds really, really nasty. Um, okay. Now it also has as a reaction a deadly reach. And deadly reach means that it can make a claw attack against an enemy that moves within range and make a second claw attack if the first one hits. So instead of just doing a normal opportunity attack, um, if you walk within 15 feet of it, as a reaction, it can decide it's going to reach out. If it hits you with one claw, going to try to hit you with the other claw. Hey, now you're grappled. Then guess what it gets to do on its turn? So, and as we said, the special damage type that it does is necrotic. All right. So now let's look at how the Boneclaw has changed in other editions. So this image is from the 3.5 edition Monster Manual 3, and that is where that's where the Boneclaw made its first appearances in 3.5. Now in that edition, it had the same AC, 16, similar hit points, 105, but notice how in 3.5 that only made it a CR5. In 5th edition, it's a CR12, and the stats aren't a whole lot different for that. Now, in 3.5, it had a 20-foot reach, and it also had as a skill move silently with a plus 17 bonus. So this thing could literally like sneak up almost, almost standing on the back of your boots behind you, and you would not notice it because it was so quiet. And in 3.5, they were intelligent and independent undead creatures. So they did not have to be tied to anybody else. They were they just went out and did what they did for their own reasons. And what did they do? They delighted in causing pain and murder. So that has been a consistent thing ever since these guys have appeared uh, in the game. And you can kind of notice over here in this image, particularly, and a little bit in the 5e image, it's got these little head things going on. I think that may have been a little nod at the time, if the year was right for 3.5e. That may have been a little bit of a nod to Darth Maul from the Star Wars. Or what was that? A Lich Crown. Gonti says a Lich Crown. Okay, that probably makes more sense uh, to have it be a Lich Crown, given the fact that they were powerful undead. Okay, now in 4th edition, you see this is the image of them from 4th edition, and this guy, he looks a little bit more maniacal than the other two. And this is out of the 4th edition monster manual. This image is. 4th edition, it was a level 14 soldier. Now, I talked about last week how in 4th edition there was like, I think it was a brute or an elite brute that the gelatinous cube was. There was all kinds, every monster had a bunch of different tags. And one of those tags was a monster type. And that basically was a clue to the DM of how you would use this monster within an encounter. Some of them were intended to be solos. Some of them that were called minions, you could have a minion of any level, and they would always hit very hard. But there were two things they always had in common. They would never do more damage on a critical hit, and they always had only one hit point. So if you ever saw anything that was like a level 20 minion, it would pack a wallop and it could hit for a ton of damage, but it was a glass cannon because you hit it for one hit point and boom, it's gone. So the idea is that you throw a ton of minions out at the party, and they kind of, each of them may get one swing in, unless your party has a lot of AOE, and then you force them to waste AOE on getting rid of all the minions, and then you have your more substantial enemies that will move in the second wave of the encounter to go and take out or try to fight against your party there. Now, in 4th edition, they were magically constructed undead, created specifically to prey on the living. And the particular method of their construction was very interesting, because they were first created by a coven of hags led by a great hag named Grigwartha. And Grigwartha trades the secret of making Boneclaws to liches and powerful evil wizards for favors that she will ask of them in the future. So she's kind of like the reverse Godfather. She's like, okay, I'm going to give you this secret of how to make this, but if I do, I'll come to you one day and I'll ask a favor of you, and you have to promise you're going to pay off. So she was a real piece of work, apparently, and her whole coven of hags was involved in making this. Now, we talked about the stat inflation in 4th edition last week, and the AC in 4th edition jumps from 16 to 30. It only has 136 hit points, so that's not a huge change from the other editions. And it had a bloodied value of 68. Now, in 4th edition, that bloodied value did mean something. As soon as it was dropped to bloodied the first time, it would do what's called a necrotic pulse. and that means it sends out a wave of necrotic healing in a 50-foot radius. And what that necrotic healing does is it heals itself and all of its allies within 50 feet for 10 hit points. It also deals 10 hit points of damage to all the enemies within the same range. So that's a little bit, you can see an echo of that in the 5th edition ability. And you notice in the 5th edition ability, that was a lot of hit points, 5d12 plus 2, but it only is in a 5-foot radius. This one is in a 50-foot radius, but it's only 10 hit points. So the 4th edition monster could hurt a lot more enemies, but it hurt them to a lot lesser extent than the 5th edition monster does. And this one had what's called threatening reach. And what that means is it can make opportunity attacks against all of its enemies within 15 feet. So it doesn't get just one opportunity attack per turn. It gets opportunity attacks on anybody that passes through its 15-foot radius during the round. So this guy could really deal out a lot of damage when it attacks. So now let's talk about how you might use a Boneclaw in a campaign. I had come up with one use during the week, and I just thought up of another use here while we were talking about it tonight. So the use I thought about during the week is an urban murder mystery. So let's say you have a fair-sized town, something like a Waterdeep or a Baldur's Gate or maybe a Luskin or something like that, and you have a bunch of murders that are happening, and nobody can figure out who is committing these murders. And maybe somebody has done some investigation and they realize that all of the victims are connected by only a single link, and that is some sort of connection to a small-time criminal or a bully. But when the criminal or bully is questioned, this suspect has ironclad alibis for several of the murders and maybe just is so physically frail that it doesn't seem like they would be at all capable of the kind of violence demonstrated by the murders. And then who has hired the PCs to look into this? Well, maybe it's a powerful noble or a wealthy merchant who fears the suspect because of some long-standing feud or dispute. And or uh, it could be maybe even that the suspect themselves reaches out to the PCs and says, "Hey, they're trying to pin these murders on me. I haven't done it. I haven't done it. You gotta go help me. Go find out who's committing these murders." And it would, then the PCs would have to figure out somehow the connection, and maybe by surveilling people that have been in feuds with the suspect, and maybe they might get lucky if somebody does something to tick off the suspect, then this Boneclaw shows up to take out the suspect's revenge. And like we said before, you might kill it, but then in less than a day, it's going to be back. And if somebody else makes it mad, well, it'll go after them. Now, oh, whoops, I'm sorry. I am going to go back to this. I told you that I had thought of another way of using this, and this is a way that could really make a player hate you. And as a DM, that just warms my cold, cold heart. Imagine you have a player that has maybe been at some time in the gray, but gradually is going darker and darker. and darker. And imagine that somewhere nearby there is a caster that is trying to achieve lichdom and fails. And imagine that this Boneclaw manages manages to attach itself to the PC as as its new master. Oh my goodness. This would be a delicious way as a DM to just torture your PCs. Um, and perhaps even, if there's some infighting within the party, uh, maybe one night when the party member that the Boneclaw's master has the most beef with is on watch all by themselves, maybe just at the edge of the shadows, there's something that moves. And then these big arms come out and grab them and disappear into the shadows. And oh, there goes Bob. And now the rest of the party is, oh my gosh, we got to save Bob. And maybe they do save Bob. But if Bob gets their fellow party member angry again, hey, it can be back. So this this would be just a really um, really evil way of using this monster in a campaign as a DM. Now, you might actually make a player so mad they would rage quit your game. So you'd have to be really careful about which player you use this with. Um, have that player, be fully understanding that there could be some really dire consequences with the direction that they're taking their PC. You might talk to them about some of the obvious consequences of legal troubles, and the nobles and the army and everything else might be after them because of stuff they've done. But then this could be like a real a really special way of giving them a hard time. And in this case, it might be one, depending on how the player wants to play out the arc of their character. This might be an opportunity where you do have a master of a Boneclaw that does find redemption, turns away, and then that destroys the Boneclaw. And you could, if you really like hamming it up as a DM, you could have some sort of real, real empathetic scene where the Bone Claw kind of approaches the master that has turned away, turned back towards the path of good, and it has kind of this pitiful, tearful look in its eye. But everything I was doing for you. Why? Why would you forsake me this way? And then it just gets smaller and smaller, and it kind of fades away, and then everybody else goes as it disappears into the ether. So that's kind of a way that you could use that. Now let's talk about reskinning the monster. And the first thing that came to my mind, and maybe the first thing that came to your mind as you've been sitting here in the channel or watching the stream, is how spider-like this creature is. Um, this creature kind of reminds you in the way its claw-like fingers extend in kind of wide arcs, and also it reminds you in a way that that it hides in the shadows, and it's a lurker, and it preys upon other things. It reminds you a lot of a spider. So perhaps you could create some kind of undead spider. Now, a lot of times we think of spiders as web spinners, but of course, in reality, and in D&D as well, there are examples of spiders that are jumping spiders or leaping spiders. And I think there's even in some edition, there's a phase spider. And I don't recall off the top of my head whether the phase spider has made it into 5th edition or not. But that was a spider that had kind of a teleportation where it could even blink between planes, like between the ethereal and plane and the natural world. So you could maybe put this thing in the Underdark somewhere, and have your party adventuring in the Underdark, and have this spider like leap out from the shadows, grab somebody with its 2 front claws, and then leap back into the shadows, and the party would have to try to chase it and hope there wasn't another one around. Um, the other thing I was thinking of is perhaps having a variation on the piercer monster. Now, you guys may recall that the piercer was that thing that it was sort of a mollusk type creature that had a shell that looked like a stalactite, where it would just sort of hang out on the ceiling of a cave. And when somebody would walk by, it would drop down and try to impale them and kill them. And then the mollusk creature would eat the victim. Well, imagine a mollusk that could teleport, or imagine a piercer that could teleport and was a lot tougher than a normal piercer. So maybe you have some sort of mechanic where it it drops down and attacks, and it has some tentacles that come out and grapple the person that it has just impaled, and then it teleports away somewhere to try to eat its prey. Um, so that would be kind of a different take on that one. And whatever you do with this, at least in my limited imagination, I almost think that any kind of way you reskin this, it almost has to be something that is super creepy and lives in the dark. Um, and something that maybe has a very malevolent streak to it, depending on how much of the template. When I think of reskinning, I don't think so much of using the flavor features of the monster. I think of using the mechanical stat block, and what you would basically do with that stat block to try to um, put that monster in a different environment or a different skin or a different form, and still be able to use it in a way that you could balance the encounter, the way that you want to have it for your party. All right. Okay, now let me see. Gosh, this is wonderful. We have 5 people here live tonight. Thank you all for coming out. I think that's a new record. Character, see you. Tony, see you. Luis, Gonti, I see you. Who else do we have in here tonight? Oh, Amish Overlord. All right, great. Hey, thanks for stopping by, Amish. Um, so I'm gonna move on to our last. Um, oh, okay. Well, before we move on to our Q&A, I told you that I'm having a hard time imagining this as anything else. What are some other options that you guys think of, and what would you maybe replace the necrotic damage with, depending on the type of creature that you had? Okay. Gonti says this would be a cool reward for an evil campaign. Luis Boneclaw's the Pennywise the Clown of D&D. My name is Takitina, and I don't forgive you. Am I going to do Death Knights? I may well do Death Knights. I am harvesting the first few ones of these from item or from monsters that I've featured on my blog since January. Since January, I've been doing uh, content every day on my blog, and I dedicated Monday to being Monster Monday. So I'm going back through, starting from January, finding monsters I've done and putting them in this particular format. Death Knight definitely is something that is on that is uh, could be a topic. All right, I love the idea of the doll being in the hands of a selfish or spiteful kid. Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you turn this from a giant creature into a tiny doll, kind of like a Chucky doll or something, that would be, yeah, that would be pretty evil. Scarecrows, psychic damage. Yes, okay. All right. Um, yeah, Twilight Zone theme. Okay. So we have some ideas for psychic damage. I guess if you made this a spider, you could change it from necrotic to poison damage. That would be kind of an obvious way of doing that. Ah, a flock of birds. Yes, that is. Oh, yeah, that's a really good idea there, character. A flock of birds. So, um, there's I guess in D&D terms you would call that monster a swarm, because a swarm is typically made up of a bunch of small creatures, but it all shares a single stat block, and so you could call this a swarm of small creatures, and maybe it's like well, maybe it could be like some kind of phase sturges or something, where they all come in and they attack and they do that blood drain thing that the sturges do. But then in addition to that, they get to teleport away with the victim that they are trying to drain, and in that way try to pick off a party of adventurers one at a time. Um, and yes, the sparrows are coming. The sparrows are coming. Or it could be just a shadow that does necrotic damage. Yes. Um, okay. A horde of gibberlings. Okay, somebody has gibberlings on the brain. Somebody has a an obsession with gibberlings, if I recall from our um, Walker of Waterdeep Discord channel. A mirror monster, Bloody Mary. Ooh, I like that. I like that, Gonti. Um, you can have the Boneclaw dwell on a reflective surface like a mirror. Come out. Okay, Luis, I see you came up with that one. All right. And oh, Dribblings are a very underused monster. Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, character. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Gonti. I should give credit to Luis for uh, the mirror monster. Thank you, Luis, for that contribution. The Candyman says character. Um, oh, the Candyman. The Candyman. Well, necrotic works well. He he gives you the skittle pox, and and each skittle starts to do necrotic damage wherever it sticks to your skin. That would be like a really, really awful Candyman. Um, okay. Uh, Freddy Krueger themed monster. Yeah, he does. He does kind of look like a little bit like Freddy Krueger from the way they've done the fifth edition monster. He does remind you a little bit of Freddy Krueger with those long nails, or um, a demonic Wolverine. You know. Okay, half psychic, half fire damage. Okay, now character. That's something that you said. Now, there's a mechanical reason why that might make this monster too tough if you start splitting the damage types. And that is because if you, or I'm sorry, not splitting the damage types, but having 2 damage types for the damage. Because what that means in 5th edition, if something does both psychic and fire, then you have to resist both psychic and fire to resist that damage. Otherwise, you take all of it. And if you give a monster with a single damage type a combination damage type, then you automatically bump up its toughness because it becomes harder for your party to deal with that. They may have a couple of them may have items that deal with resisting fire damage, and some of them may have items that help them deal with psychic damage. But there's not a lot of things out there that would deal with both or with 2 different types of damage at the same time. So that's a good idea, but you would probably want to figure out what an appropriate CR would be. Maybe call it a CR 14 monster instead of CR 12, and then balance it for an encounter depending on what your party's level, how tough you want that fight to be by doing that. What else do we have? Have any other questions here? Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Okay. Yeah. Well, everybody, I think that I really do appreciate everyone coming out tonight to watch the stream. And I will go ahead and I will give you a little tease for next week. Next week, we are going to talk about. You say that gibberlings are underused. This is a monster I have never seen used in a campaign. We're going to talk about the Balhanoth. And I am going to have to make use of the D&D Beyond pronunciation guide to learn exactly how to pronounce that, but I call it the Balhanoth. And that is a very strange creature indeed. And it is one that showed up in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. So that's I believe that was a source that it came out in. So I'll be curious to see if it has any antecedents in previous editions. All right. Well, everyone, I have been DM Galabond. This has been Monster Monday. And I'll remind you that tomorrow night at 8 o'clock on this here Twitch channel, I do the Tales from the Table where I recap my weekend sessions. Then on Saturday at noon, I run my 1st edition game of the History of D&D. On Sundays at 2:30 p.m., I run my 5th edition game, The Walker of Waterdeep. And then, of course, on Monday nights, I do Monster Monday. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful week and watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night.